Greetings, everyone. It's Dr. Soli.
Hello, hey, Dr. Foley.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. There's so many people, I don't know who to wave to.
Hi, guys.
Oh, there's Sarah. Andrea, I don't know you, but hi. Here's Morgan, Jennifer, Dr. Spade, Colleen. There's Clarissa Ortiz, one of my advisees. Good to see you. I may not be able to stay on very long tonight, guys, but I wanted to make my appearance, and I'm going to go off cam now, but I'll come back on.
Well, Dr. Soli, actually, before you go off camera, if you want to kick us off this evening, if you have to leave soon, really quickly, I'm Colleen Malone. I'm your department manager. Welcome to our Summer 1 term town hall. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Soli so she can introduce herself because we do have some new students. We started a cohort this term. So Dr. Soli, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself for our new students.
Oh, thank you. So hi, everybody. I am Dr. Soli. I am the Director of Clinical Training for the program here. I have been with the program since the week that the first cohort started. So I really have been here pretty much as long as the program has existed, and along with Dr. Eldridge and Dr. Stretch, who we were sort of the lone pioneers in the first year, have a tremendous investment in getting it running and going and accredited. And I'm so pleased to see new faces. I look forward to working with all of you. As the Director of Clinical Training, one of my primary responsibilities is really helping people with their clinical training and their clinical placement. So many of you who are on the call who are looking towards being placed in your fieldwork sites within the next 6 months will be getting a reminder email from me in the next week or two about some of the processes, so you can be looking for that. I also coordinate all of the work with Clinical Training Manager, which for those of you who are brand new, you don't know what that is, but for those of you who are here, you've gotten your feet into it, and that's something that will be coming along a little bit more. But it is great to meet and see all of you, and I don't even know who else is here. Colleen, would you like me to pass it over to Drake, since he's the only one that I can see that's a faculty member?
Yes, we can pass it back over to Dr. Spaeth, but I do know we have Dr. Rush Wilson and Dr. Hudson on at least, and I have to go through and look who else has joined.
Okay, and is Dr. LA on her way?
I believe so. I haven't heard otherwise.
Okay, well, I will hang out for as long as I possibly can.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Soli. And just really quickly,
Absolutely.
if everyone who's logged in, if you can please make sure you're on mute. That doesn't mean permanently, it just means while you're listening. That would really be appreciated. And then if you do have a question, again, feel free to unmute yourself, jump in, go ahead and ask a question. We'll save time at the end if you want to wait, or feel free to type your question into the chat box. I'll be monitoring that. But if you keep yourself on mute, it really helps with feedback and background noise. So thanks very much. Dr. Spaeth, if you don't mind introducing yourself and giving us a little heads up about what you're going to be presenting on, that would be appreciated.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Very exciting to see the new faces, as well as many faces I recognize from classes that I've taught over the past year. But I've been a faculty member in the online CMHC for almost a year now, and had that year as department faculty and then jumping to adjunct status. So I will be continuing with you all as an adjunct, but as of June 1st, I'm starting as department chair of the psychology department at Saybrook University, which is a bastion of humanistic and existential psychology, which some of you know is one of my favorite theoretical orientation approaches. So really excited about the opportunity that offers, but we'll miss being with you all in that capacity as faculty. I'll miss the Chicago School as department faculty in general. I've been there for 15 years, and I'm also an alum. I graduated, I guess, officially in 2002, though I probably started as a student in 1994. So that shows how long I've been attached to the school. In terms of my background, I have served as an Air Force psychologist for 4 years in the past. I've worked in a lot of different settings. Got into teaching in the counseling department back in 2006, well before CACREP existed, and about the only people it seemed like that were teaching in counseling departments were psychologists there for a while. So I'm really a carryover from those old days where we didn't need the PhD in counselor education to do this. And I had to get all of my expertise in counseling on the job, as it were, really learning about things as I went. But it's been great. I really identify probably more strongly as a counselor and a counselor educator even than I do as a psychologist. So it's been nice to wear both hats. I'm going to be presenting tonight about something called spiritual emergencies, where basically someone who is going through a spiritual process of some sort, or a spiritual awakening, or a spiritual transformation may encounter, for lack of a better description, a mental health challenge or mental health crises, or someone who really has some connection to spirituality in the midst of mental health challenges and crises. So really looking at what we normally see as psychopathology sometimes in a new way where it's appropriate. The times when we have to kind of de-emphasize the medical model and de-pathologize what it is we're looking at with clients and what it is that we're kind of helping them with. So I want to basically talk about what a spiritual emergency is, where the concept came from, and really talk about how we can begin to address it in a counseling context, not necessarily adhering specifically to a medical model, but using other therapeutic and counseling approaches as alternative ways of dealing with those. Is that enough, Colleen, for an intro?
That's perfect. Thank you. A good teaser. Thank you. And I know, Dr. Rush Wilson, you're there. So if you can introduce yourself and come on camera, we would love to see you if possible. And then we'll go Dr. Hudson and Dr. Eldridge.
I am Tiffany Rush Wilson. I am the Associate Department Chair, and I am on I-90 in between Cleveland and Toronto because I live in both of those places. So I've actually just pulled over so that I can talk to you legally and not get myself in trouble or my truck's. Happy to see all of you. I'll be here throughout the meeting, but I will turn the camera back off as I.
Thank you very much. Yes, turn the camera off and please only listen while you drive. Be safe.
Will do.
And that goes for the rest of you students too. If you do need to call into something, only listen and focus on driving. We want all of our students to be safe. All right, Dr. Hudson, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's really good to see some faces I haven't seen in a while, and then some new faces of those of you that I don't know, and hopefully we'll get to know here soon. I am Dr. Danita Hudson, and I am full-time faculty with our clinical mental health program. And I don't know, Colleen, is there anything particular, just kind of what I do? Is that? Yep. Okay.
Yes,
all right.
Please.
So, okay, so I serve in a couple of capacities. I serve as the student relations committee chair, and so which I will hopefully be reaching out to some of you to see if you're interested in actually being involved with our committee, which is just as it's about building strong relationships with our students and supporting you where we can. I also serve as well. I oversee the Service Learning Day, which you all experience at residency. For those of you that have been to residency, you're very familiar with that portion of residency. For those of you that have not been yet, hopefully it'll be something that you really find enjoyable. It's a day where we really spend some time serving the community. And then I also serve on the admissions chair. So many of you, even if I haven't worked with you in class, I may have interviewed you as part of the admissions process for the program. So I think that's about it for me, Colleen.
Thanks very much, Dr. Hudson. Dr. Eldridge, are you still there?
I'm here. Hi, everybody. Good to see all of your faces. And I especially want to send a warm welcome to our current 500 students who are joining this town hall for the very first time. So we do this every term, and it's just a nice way to have some community involvement, even though we are all spread out across the country and the world. I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado, and I've been with the program, like Dr. Sully said, since before the beginning. This is kind of our baby. We designed this, and really proud of the program and so glad to have all of you in it. Besides teaching, I do some curriculum work. I'm the curriculum lead for our program. So when we're adapting classes, fixing them, adjusting them, that's what I've got my hands into. And I'm also in charge of the newsletter, and I'd love to put a plug out there that we need some new people to join our newsletter team, because a lot of our core people are getting ready to graduate and finding themselves very busy in field work, and we would just love to have, send out that invitation for anybody who is interested in that type of work. If you have publishing experience or if you just want to get involved, we'd love to have you. So reach out to me if you have an interest in that. And I think that's it for me, but I also think that Dr. Rodney Harris is here as well. I want to make sure we give him the floor if you're here, Dr. Harris.
I am Dr. Eldridge. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So I am here, and I am right outside Raleigh, North Carolina. And I think my dog has to go out. He just jumped up and gave me a warning that it's about time to go out. So he's jumping up and letting me know that he wants to go out. So this is Jackson. And he is telling me he wants to go out. So I am Dr. Rodney Harris, of course, and I am director of the Virtual Clinical Training Center. And this is now I've been here a year. And so I love it here. And I think that's all. I'm excited to see most of you guys here, and it's good to see a lot of old faces, and excited to see a lot of new faces. So you guys hope you have fun tonight, and good to see Dr. Spate tonight. I'm excited about the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, great, thanks. I don't think I've seen any other faculty jump on or off. If you are here and I missed you, I'm sorry, and jump in. But other than that, just a few quick announcements. One, if you are interested in becoming a graduate assistant and using Federal Work Study, please keep that in mind as we are looking to hopefully add on a couple more grad assistants in this department. And then also I have a couple other departments that are looking for graduate assistants. So if you're interested in using Federal Work Study, let me know. Just send me an email and just say, hey, I'm interested, and or being a student ambassador. So if you're interested in working with our newbies, our students who just started the program, and kind of giving them some insight and wisdom, that would be great. You also work with students coming from the accepted status who kind of transition into starting the program this fall. So let me know if you're interested in that too. The other thing is that I'm going to put in a plug for our student group, Theta Chi Sigma. I don't know if anyone is here who participates in TCS. Please, please, please speak up. I'd love for you guys to give a little plug for the group. But regardless, it's another way to kind of connect with some of your peers. It's a great thing to add to your portfolio and experience throughout the program. So you can reach out to Laura Pilcher and Dr. Amy Crowley, who kind of lead the student group. Dr. Amy Crowley actually and her wife just had a new baby, so she is off for the next couple of days, rightfully so. So we're excited for a new CMHC family member. And then the other thing I wanted to make an announcement about is that if you do have any questions or concerns about Blue Jeans, you know, don't hesitate to let me know, but you can reach out to Blue Jeans directly too. They have a great, like a help desk, IT desk that you can work with. And we also have a Blue Jeans rep, and I will post her information, contact information when I post the recording of the town hall in the advising forum in the announcements section. So you can reach out to her as well. I just want to let you know that the Chicago School Help Desk does not do Blue Jeans tech support because we're actually the only program that uses Blue Jeans as we need it to work with our practicum sites and clients and things like that. It's HIPAA and it's compliant. I'll leave it at that. So let me know if you guys have any questions. Again, feel free to jump in, take yourself off mute throughout Dr. Spaeth's presentation, and or you know, type your questions in the chat box. I think Dr. LA is going to be joining us here in a bit. If not, I'm sure she sends her welcomes and warm wishes, and we will hear from her soon. All right, Dr. Spaeth, thanks so much again for... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, one more announcement. Also, we get community involvement points. So I want to make sure you all know that you get 5 points for being here if you stay throughout the entire course of the presentation, and those can be applied to assignments in this term. That was it.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, Dr. Spaeth, if you'd be so kind, we will turn it over to you. And I think you said you had a PowerPoint presentation, so feel free to share your screen.
Okay.
And we look forward to that.
Bear with me here. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. All right. So I feel like spirituality is one of the unfortunately most neglected topics in graduate programs in counseling, and graduate programs in psychology, mental health training contexts. A lot of counselors and mental health professionals feel sometimes a little in left field, so to speak, when it comes to working with the spiritual issues with clients. And I've got to tell you, I feel really strongly that if you work with clients long enough, you will encounter their spiritual issues. I mean, technically for me, even atheists have spiritual struggles, as odd as that might sound ultimately. You know, and then just real quick, I think what I'll do is distinguish between religion and spirituality, because when I was defending my dissertation, which was really all about spirituality as connected with trauma, my committee really made me go into the differences between religion and spirituality. So about 52 pages of that, I will try to condense down to, you know, maybe a paragraph or two, which is basically that when we talk about religion, first of all, it's interesting because the word breaks down religio. Ligio means tying or to tie back to. The re is the back. The ligio is to tie, like a ligament or a thread or a rope. It really sort of expresses this idea that there is a yearning to kind of be connected to something ultimately. So religion really kind of when we think of religion, we think of things maybe that are more organized, that are more sometimes hierarchical in terms of traditions and values, things that are done a certain way, traditions. And religions will vary with regard to this, but there may be some kind of leader or some kind of facilitator, someone who mediates a connection to the sacred or to God or to whatever their conception of that is. But there's a certain amount of structure, there's a certain amount of values, traditions, prescribed ways of doing things. The concept of spirituality, on the other hand, tends to be something a little bit more individualized and less structured in some ways. Some of I looked at a lot of research on this, and it seemed that, the definition of religion was pretty standard in many ways. In other words, people agreed more readily about what it is, but there was a lot of variation in terms of what spirituality was. More or less, people seem to agree that spirituality is individual. It's all about a freedom to seek something sacred in the way one sees fit to do that. It's less about following instructions and more about personal responsibility. And again, there's some varying, levels of opinion on that. But in the course of it, I became really kind of obsessed with finding at least 3 things that seem to be common features to spirituality. I couldn't find 3 things that everybody could agree on. I could find one thing that every single person, every single source, every single religion and religious context that I looked at where people were talking about spirituality, they all agreed on one thing only, which is that spirituality is about connection. Now, isn't that interesting? Because the term religion, I just said, religio, means to tie back to, and it's about connection. But spirituality really is about actively seeking connection to what? That's where, again, the whole sort of agreement breaks down and, kind of dissolves into chaos. Some people feel it's a connection to God or something greater than themselves. Some people feel it's a connection to something within themselves or, empowering, some sense of empowerment from within. Some people feel it's a seeking of connection to the universe. But sometimes spirituality can be about experiencing a mystical kind of experience, either spontaneously or on purpose after, certain kinds of disciplined spiritual practices that one engages in. And in this sort of changed consciousness, this enhanced consciousness that's characteristic of a mystical state, this sense of connection becomes everything because one experiences a lack of boundaries between self and others. One experiences a lack of separation. You might feel that you are in much closer, intimate connection with everything. You might feel related to everything around you, animals, plants, trees, the natural world. A mystical experience can also be characterized as what William James called the ineffable, that is, difficulty being expressed in words. A mystical experience can be about feelings of euphoria and joy and a sense of belonging. Again, I could go on and on with a list of these things, but some people don't report experiencing a genuine mystical experience at all, and yet they still have a lot of satisfaction following individual kinds of spiritual paths. All of that is just to kind of give you some background on what it is, that I mean when we refer to things like spiritual emergencies. So the title of my presentation is From Emergency to Emergence, Working with Spiritual Crises of Transformation. The term spiritual emergency is sort of a kind of a play on words. And let's see if I can go to the next slide here. When we talk about an emergency, of course, that concept of crisis comes to mind, something that it's a crisis is something that overwhelms our ability to cope with it. So, that feeling of acute anxiety and panic and the kind of breakdown of things, suddenly everything that we're used to bringing to bear to cope with something unexpected no longer seems to work for us. So we face kind of a crisis. And then we also think of maybe the ER, the emergency room, if someone is having a mental health crisis of some kind. But there's also in the word emergency a sense of the word emergence, which is kind of a coming forth or an awakening, something that's trying to kind of be born ultimately. So some people really value in their personal journey through life a sense of spiritual awakening and transformation. And this is seen as a wonderful thing generally. But what some mental health professionals aren't as aware of, and certainly members of the general public sometimes aren't as aware of, that spiritual awakening isn't always an easy, pleasant, or a smooth process. In fact, around the world, in many cultures, including this one, there can be many mental health challenges associated with a spiritual awakening or a spiritually transformative process in one's life. The best way that I can explain this is to share a personal story. So this goes all the way back to around 1994, 1995, when I was a graduate student at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. I had been involved in spiritual practices on my own for some time, mostly involving a kind of meditation that I would do that I developed on my own. I researched a lot of different kinds of meditation approaches from different traditions. And to make a long story short, I developed my own way of sitting for about an hour every day doing a mantra-based breathing meditation, which I found deeply peaceful. It helped me not only get through the day and cope with the anxiety and stress of graduate school, it also helped me have a lot of unusual insights and understandings about things. But I liked that it could keep me pretty even keel, because like most people who actually get to the point of being a graduate student, I had a high level of stress and anxiety in my life. I mean, let's face it, if you're a graduate student, the likelihood is high that you probably meet criteria a little bit for obsessive compulsive disorder. We all have kind of those tendencies, that helps us, really get through the routine of graduate school and all of those things. The meditation was a real nice balance to me. But then, unexpectedly, one night, and I want to say it was in late 1994, I had something very strange, unusual, and frightening happen to me while I was meditating. Suddenly, the way that I like to describe this, it was like something broke inside my head while I was meditating. And it was like a wall that kept, me sane in some ways was no longer there. I started having visions. I started experiencing, hallucinations, voices, things in the room that just weren't there, seeing, shadows. I had racing heartbeat, heart palpitations, hyperventilating. I was experiencing, I kind of met all the criteria for panic disorder. And kind of subsequent to that, for the next few weeks, in fact, I felt like I was seeing things that weren't there, hearing things that weren't there. As a graduate student in clinical psychology, as you might imagine, this was really concerning to me, because I felt like I was going to end up possibly in a hospital if I couldn't get some kind of handle on this. And I didn't understand why my meditation practice, which was supposed to be good for me, would drive me into this kind of a state. And, it really was associated over the next few weeks and months with just a lot of acute sensitivity to things. I felt like lights were too bright, sounds were too loud. The slightest things that I would touch would be almost painful. in, sensory overload ultimately. So fortunately, because I was such a geek in terms of wanting to research everything, I didn't feel like I could trust anyone to talk to because I didn't want to be hospitalized while I was trying to go to school for clinical psychology. I was able to find some information about what can happen if one has a pretty intense spiritual practice. And it's one of the ways, apparently, that these kinds of spiritual emergencies can be generated in one's life. I came to understand that whatever I was doing with my meditation, I had broken into an insightful awareness with something that was, for lack of a better description, deep in my unconscious that I was really struggling to kind of integrate and understand. It connected to a lot of things in my past, and I don't mind sharing with you that I really had to come to terms with the fact of sexual abuse at age 4. That was kind of figuring in a very intense way with all of it. And I was able to find a spiritual teacher that described what I was going through as something called a Kundalini awakening, which is better understood in Asian countries and in the East in general. Buddhism understands it, Hinduism understands it as something that happens that will cause this kind of explosive, sometimes painful, lack of a better description, enlightenment process where your tiny ego suddenly breaks into something much bigger. And one experiences in all of these traditionally psychopathological ways until you can have someone help you kind of get it under control through other kinds of spiritual practices. There's even a discipline called Kundalini Yoga that is designed to really handle this. And in fact, the students are trained in that tradition to evoke the Kundalini awakening process. I did it by accident, and others do. I realize we just don't have a context in the mental health field in this part of the world for really understanding this in a healthy way. And thank goodness I didn't see a psychiatrist and get put on medication, because it's been one of the most wonderfully transformative processes in my life where I ultimately accessed deep levels of creativity, deep levels of understanding of things. I have genuine, wonderful, mystical experiences on a regular basis in nature. I have experiences where the natural world really hits me with a lot of intense beauty. And it's been something I've been able to put into this great container. And it prepared me when I was an intern in the Air Force. When I encountered someone, I was on emergency room call, and in fact, they used to call me Faith the Black Cloud, because every time I would carry the pager, there would be crisis after crisis. That pager would go off. I still have twitch reactions to beeping sounds because of it. But I came in, there was a young man who was extremely anxious, clearly experiencing active hallucinations, was talking in a very strange manner. And his mother said this had happened because she blamed it on his study of the Kabbalah, which he was doing on his own. The Kabbalah is a tradition in Judaism of a mystical kind of pursuit. A lot of real Orthodox Jewish traditions, in fact, forbid any exposure to the Kabbalah without a lot of prior preparation and study, because they feel this sort of thing can happen. The Kabbalah is set up in such a way that it's designed to produce an encounter with God. And in the tradition, if one is not ready, one might actually become a little bit confused if they're really following what the Kabbalah is leading them to. So again, I'm trying to keep this a little bit brief, but there's a meditation practice called the Tree of Life in the Kabbalistic system, and he had delved into it on his own. And what this system does is it helps you understand connections between very odd things and similarities between things. So you start to really get drawn into this real obsessive pursuit of what are the hidden meaningful connections between the most unlikely objects. And if you try to describe this to someone, you start to sound very delusional. So he was actively in this kind of state. Once I realized that this was in connection with the Kabbalah, I was able to enlist the support of my supervisor to not refer him to a psychiatrist for medication right away, but to see what could happen with his mother's support if we could find a genuine teacher for him in the Kabbalistic tradition. It was fortunate that I was aware enough and familiar enough. And again, to make a long story short, within about 2 or 3 weeks, he became a lot more stable, and the teacher helped him really and get a lot of insight and understanding from what it was that he was studying, rather than being so confused and delusional ultimately. This is a classic example of a spiritual emergency that was guided in a nurturing way to become a spiritual emergence and a spiritual transformation. So that just gives you some context a little bit. I mean, there's a much longer story to all of that, but we don't have time to go into it all, but I did want to at least give a little bit of background there. So the learning outcomes for this, I'm hoping that by the end of this, you'll be able to at least identify or recognize 3 different types or precipitants of spiritual emergencies, to distinguish them between spiritual crises / emergencies that are associated with mental health challenges, and the productive, transformative spiritual experiences that are genuinely helpful in clients' lives, and how one can become the other with a nurturing kind of approach. And to describe at least 2 approaches to doing that, helping clients understand their symptoms as guideposts for psychospiritual wholeness and actual evolution. Okay, so what is a spiritual emergency? Stanislav Grof describes it as mental health challenges or issues that are connected in some way to a spiritual awakening process or a spiritual development process, stemming from an organically natural movement toward wholeness, something he calls holotropism, which literally means movement toward wholeness. This is similar in some ways to what Rogers calls the actualizing tendency. That tendency within us, Rogers says, that if we can just get out of our own way, we know what is authentically good for us. We try to move just like the potato plant that grows in the darkness. We try to move toward the light as best we can, and we might do so in distorted and twisted ways if we aren't given the encouragement or support that we ultimately need for our own movement toward that. Grof really takes this seriously and says that, there's this sort of spiritual process that we, can, if we can kind of learn to surrender to it, we can really guide our own holistic health, understanding the unity between mind, body, spirit, not as separate categories or fragmented things, but as things that are all interconnected ultimately. So again, we want to try to convert the emergency crisis aspect to a genuine spiritual emergence aspect. David Lukoff, back in 1998, made history. I don't know if you've delved deeply enough into the DSM-5 yet to see the V code, V62.9, religious or spiritual problem. But Lukoff and colleagues were the one who are responsible for that being there. The DSM-4 was the first time religion and spirituality entered the mental health arena in the DSM. It was this V code came about because Lukoff was talking to the task force about spiritual emergencies and spiritual awakenings ultimately, and the different kinds of mental health challenges associated with that. He had a much more extensive diagnostic system that he proposed. Ultimately, he's had to settle for what the task force decided could be this V code, religious or spiritual problem. They wanted it to be broad enough that you could fit a number of things into it ultimately. But some of his work is very interesting if you're interested in really kind of getting into the history of that. He even proposed a category called psychosis with mystical features and a mystical experience with psychotic features, and all of the different criteria that you would use to differentially kind of diagnose those things. So, different types of spiritual emergencies, what are we talking about? Well, it can be a psychosis that is associated or somehow connected with a spiritual crisis involving delusions and hallucinations. I have to say that fits what I experienced back in the 90s, ultimately. I have to wonder, as does Grof, as does Lukoff, as does a lot of my colleagues who are also very interested in this phenomena, if alien abduction accounts that are so prevalent, in fact, aren't some form of spiritual crisis, spiritual emergency. This what we might see as mental health professionals as this delusional belief, ultimately. Is this a symbolic manifestation of something deeper, ultimately? Carl Jung even talks about how before we had aliens, we had fairies, and people talked about being abducted by the fairies and how the fairies would steal your children if you didn't honor certain kinds of practices or appease them, ultimately. There seems to be, in Jung's terms, something archetypal and historical, how this sort of abduction scenario evolves over time, ultimately. Around the world, in the Siberian context, the shaman often has what we would see as mental health crises, mental health challenges, hallucinations, delusions. A lot of shamans in training meet criteria for bipolar disorder with psychotic features. Depression, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Again, Kundalini awakening psychoses. It can also be trauma or loss that involves some spiritual phenomena or challenges. When September 11th happened, it caused a huge religious and spiritual crisis for large numbers of people. Some interesting things happened around that. Either it seems like people lost their belief in God altogether, because how could God that would exist permit something so horrific and so unjust and so evil? The very fact that it happened for many people was, the loss of their belief in God. So it was this tremendous grieving process of their ability to kind of believe in a loving, benign God. For others, realizing that religion has a dark side, for them only put their belief in God in a much stronger container, that, God must exist because, something that is so awful is happening as the balance of all of that, that the only way that, in fact, they could cope with the extent of the evil that happened would be a stronger belief in a God, that there's some mysterious meaning or purpose, beyond all of that, ultimately. So it's an interesting kind of phenomenon sometimes, that traumas will either strengthen or weaken this spiritual connection, these spiritual beliefs, but that coping with that ultimately can result in this thing that we call post-traumatic growth. But to ignore the spiritual aspects of this is missing a big piece of what we are looking at with trauma as a phenomenon, and when we're getting involved with clients and getting them involved in counseling or psychotherapy for it. Generalized anxiety associated with spiritual factors. I think like my guy in the emergency room in the Air Force, he had a lot of anxiety and obsessiveness about trying to follow the hidden connections between things through his study of the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. And he became lost in some of the nervousness and anxiety associated with all of that. So untangling those threads. And then we rarely think of depression in this regard, but oftentimes I've really seen instances where depression is connected to this existential angst, this lack, this confrontation with, what is the meaning of my life, or is this really what it's all about? I thought my life was leading to something, and this is nothing like what I was led to expect would happen, and everything is a disappointment. Um, I just can't seem to muster any interest or joy in things, and I feel like I'm falling into the dark void ultimately. But you might have even heard this phrase, the long dark night of the soul that precedes the awakening and the sense of joy that ultimately follows that. Sometimes depression can be seen as sort of a hibernation, a conserving of energy to really prepare for something that's really trying to awaken in a huge way deep within one's psyche. So nurturing clients through depression rather than trying to medicate it away could be an option for some kinds of clients. Or general emotional volatility or cycling associated with creative and spiritual processes. We see this with artists a lot of time. Vincent van Gogh comes to mind. Definitely deeply, deeply troubled man, ultimately, and very self-destructive in many ways, but was in touch with a window on beauty that he opened for the rest of us to see. A mentor of mine, in fact, said that artists make of themselves a thin thread. They really stretch out their souls and spirits and open up to a lot of vulnerability and suffering in order to open those windows on beauty in the world for the rest of us. So artists, poets, people who are creative, dancers, they all should have an honored place in the world, and yet many times they're starving. I wish we could really nurture them in a much better way. So what causes or what sort of precipitates these things? Attachment issues, developmental factors, things that happen in childhood, sexual abuse seems to be really kind of linked sometimes, and how ultimately we cope with those things. The intensity and frequency of spiritual practices, especially if we are doing so without any mentoring or support or guidance, and losses or traumas, particularly during the birth traumas. This comes from Groff and colleagues. And sometimes coping with this can be really intensified during our maturation process. So the things that can happen during these critical attachment periods, things early in our life, Groff sort of controversially thought that the birth process itself can be a little traumatic in that we have some kind of carryover ultimately from those things. Who knows? Or some combination of all of these things. But it's worth spending the time with clients to unpack these things if they are open to understanding these kinds of things as spiritual factors in their lives. And I'm not saying to do it with all clients. Some clients are spiritually oriented, some are not. But we need not shy away from it ultimately. And while I'm thinking about it, I want to really jump in and say I'm not completely anti-psychiatry or anti-medication. I've really helped clients with their spiritual process when they've stabilized sometimes through some antipsychotic medication or antidepressant meds in some cases. I'm just not a big believer in exclusively treating clients with meds, looking at how much they're sedated and then saying, oh, look, they're stable, when in fact, they're just in a deep kind of state of numbness or sedation because they've been over-medicated. I really want to move away from over-reliance on medication when it comes to some of these things that might be spiritual emergencies so that we can nurture them into a spiritual emergence. So this is the last slide, I promise. How do we do this? Well, we want to depathologize the spiritual emergencies for the clients and for ourselves in some cases, and de-emphasize the medical model here, as shocking as that might sound. But those of us who have taken theories understand that we have alternatives to the medical model, narrative and postmodern approaches, helping clients understand their symptoms as an unfolding story in their life. I really think that Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and how he emphasizes the three phases of separation, initiation, and return, how it unfolds in stories and unfolds in our lives, seeing counseling itself in terms of those three stages. Ultimately, the creativity through the narrative approaches can help them put these pieces together that seem so fragmented and chaotic into a much more orderly way. And then existential humanistic approaches, seeing symptoms as a yearning for meaning and wholeness, that ultimately even depression might be seen to serve a purpose rather than just being meaningless. Our anxiety means that we are understanding that something is missing and there's a limited time that we have on this planet to try to find that thing ultimately. Transpersonal approaches, seeing these things as a type of soul loss. This is something that comes to us from indigenous traditions around the world, and a hunger for those lost pieces of ourselves that might, go away when we experience trauma, loss, illness. Jungian approaches, seeing symptoms as prompts from the collective unconscious, an archetypal movement toward wholeness, as Groff and colleagues does. Postmodern CBT approaches like dialectical behavior therapy or ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, seeing symptoms as distortions or limitations in the assimilation and accommodation of earth-shattering, insightful constructs or schemas, some new information coming into our life that we're defending against in some way that helps us understand the interconnectedness of things in a much more constructive way. And then relational and interpersonal psychodynamic approaches, seeing symptoms as deeper yearning for intimacy in our relationships with others. We're so separated from each other by increasing technological advances. We're so dehumanized. We have a hunger to really reach out and have true, intimate, authentic relationships with people. Social media can be sometimes like a candy substitute, but ultimately not a substitute for real relationships. So understanding the spiritual aspects of this and patiently kind of nurturing those things. Phenomenologically setting aside our biases and preconceptions that might come from seeing it as disease or illness is not going to be helpful. And I think I better end it there because of probably impinging on
We're getting close on time, Drake. You're right.
Yeah.
This is Dr. LA, everybody. Hi. Sorry I wasn't here at the beginning. I got held up in another meeting. So I think we have time for one question, Dr. Space, but I want to encourage students if they have specific questions to reach out to you directly. And I need to ask Dr. Rush Wilson something. If she's on, I'll send her text. I need you to read the text. Tiffany and Lisa. So Dr. Rush Wilson just responded to the text. So does anybody have one question they'd like to ask Dr. Space? I saw some in the chat and there was some discussion.
I had a question of how you walk the line ethically between, because there is this difference between spirituality and religion. If you have someone who is having a spiritual crisis and that feeds into a resistance based on their personal belief system, how do you kind of bridge that gap so that you can avoid pathologizing something that might not be pathological and work with this person without imposing your values on them?
If I understand what you're asking, I would say that I see resistance always as an invitation rather than as something to be like eliminated. When clients are showing resistance, it means that there's a genuine process of anxiety because they're getting close to something really important. And I like to try to work with that. And I even try to frame it for them as an invitation to deeper understanding of themselves. It's not something that, I see as an invitation to me to get into a power struggle with them or to sort of pathologize. I always take sort of a curious look at this very intriguing thing that's happening right now kind of approach. I think that helps me keep my values in check and respects where they are at and awakens their curiosity to get into it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good question, Ash.
Yeah.
So I understand that Eve may have not been able to make her announcement at the beginning of the meeting. Is Eve still on? I was trying to see if she was here. Not seeing her. Did you guys have a chance to talk about Theta Chi Sigma? Did somebody talk about them?
Hey, LA, this is
Jen.
Colleen. Oh,
Go ahead, Holly.
oh, sorry. I was just gonna say I briefly mentioned it, LA. If anyone else would like to jump in, or if you want to share anything, that would be great.
Do we have any of the Theta Chi Sigma officers on?
Yeah, Dr. LA, I'm on. It's Michelle.
Oh, hey, Michelle. All right.
Hi.
So, Michelle, I'm not really sure what Eve wanted to talk about. I think it was about recruitment. Is that right?
Well, basically, I know that like right now, because Laura, myself, and Mildred, like all of us are graduating, and so we are actively seeking new members. We're also looking at, I know elections, stuff like that going on to replace us. And so, but yeah, we had a little bit of a discussion in the chat bar, basically just letting them know that it's, you have to have a GPA of 3.5 hours, and then it's 9 hours that you have to have already completed. But yeah, we'd love to have you guys. You'll learn a lot. We have different speakers that come once a month, and then of course the board members are open to everyone. Usually people don't want to show up, which is cool. But yeah, the board members are, I mean, the board meetings are open to everyone, but then of course on the third Mondays of every month we also have a regular meeting. So y'all are more than welcome to join us. Just look in the advising forum and you can get the link and everything else.
All right. And it's really important. I mean, this is just a really great way to get involved and build your resume. Eventually, we're hoping this group will eventually, in the very near future, apply to become a chapter of Chi Sigma Iota, which is the National Society for Counseling. We can't say that officially yet, but that is the goal. And I can speak from my own personal experience at CSI and my involvement in Chi Sigma Iota as the president of the chapter that I was at has given me a lot of openings professionally and has helped me network. And I've gotten internship sites. I've had national leadership opportunities. I've worked with incredible people. I met people like Dr. Patricia Arredondo, Sam Gladding, other people through my experiences with Chi Sigma Iota and being part of an honor society like PCS. So get involved. This is a great way to build those networks and really start to establish yourself in the profession. All right. So any other announcements before we close out? We've got 2 minutes. I want to see if there's any other announcements or anybody else has anything they want to share. Well, I'm going to call out one person on the call that I know is involved in something. Ash, what was it like to go to ACA?
It was awesome. I don't think that our students are going to enough conferences. Just as far as like, if you're a student and you feel like conferences are just designed for you after you get into the professional sector, I would really discourage that train of thought. This was my second conference that I've ever been to. My first one was in February, and I went to Time to Thrive in Orlando. And that was peanuts compared to ACA, which was huge. You get to sit in and listen. Like you're listening to people that are writing the books that you're reading. And you're getting that first class experience of being able to ask them questions. You have to be an ACA member to be in the program. Being an ACA member means that the divisions of ACA, when they have their conferences, you're going to get a discount. ACA conference, you get a discount. Time to Thrive is a human rights campaign that is not affiliated with the ACA as far as the division, but they give you a discount.
Took us apart.
So yeah, I would highly recommend it. I mean, it's ACA was a little bit more expensive than what it was when I went to the Time to Thrive conference, but the experience that I got there, I mean, you get networking opportunities that you really aren't going to get any other time. I mean, counselors don't just come from the area. I mean, they come from all over the United States to these things.
And ask
So
the guy
I
that
would
you get
highly
to have
recommend
lunch,
it.
and you get to have lunch with your faculty, right? With special, like
You
awesome
do.
faculty like Faith and Dr. Moore and I and Dr. Jones. We all were there.
Right?
So we
And
had lunch. Yeah. I think
and you
Holly's
get to
on the
meet
call too. Did I see?
alumni.
Yeah, and you get to meet alumni. Holly, you went too. Are you still on?
Hey. Yes, I was there. I missed the lunch, unfortunately, but it was amazing, and I got to go to a presentation about psychedelics and therapy, and it was really, really interesting. So, and I got to meet, I got to be like a total nerd and go get my textbook signed and stuff like that. So it was really cool. It was a lot of fun. It was something that I hope will be like an annual tradition. I definitely encourage you to go.
And I think Ivy, you were there for day 2, right?
Sorry, yes, I'm driving, so it took me a minute to come off of mute. Yes, I was there. It was really interesting. A lot of the member organizations of ACA, so like if you're a member of any of the divisions, they have representatives there and meetings and things you can go to. And Holly and I actually got to join the division for the government and military at one of the,
Which Dr. Duchek and Dr. Sauer are very involved in.
and we went to one of their lunches and actually got to speak and sort of network with them. And I'd like to actually see if we couldn't get some of the students more involved. I know they're planning on some pretty big things they want to implement, helping students have mentors in the program. They're one of the least expensive divisions to join as well. But that's another perk for going to the conferences, the networking, even among the divisions and other ACA types of memberships.
Good. Thank you, guys. I tried to call you out without any notice whatsoever, putting you on the spot. The 3 of you did wonderful, so thank you. So we're going to close up now. Dr. Stace, thank you so much for your conversation. I'm sure some students will be reaching out to you because that was very interesting, and we'd love to know more. And just for those of you who don't know, Dr. Spaeth is leaving us. He's going to be going to Saybrook to become a department chair of a program there, but we're keeping him on as an adjunct, so we will be seeing him in some of our classes here and there. So we just want to say a huge thank you for your time with us, and we're glad we get to keep you in some capacity. So that's awesome, and best wishes in your new position.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I can't leave completely. It's my home, for crying out loud. And, just to say real quick, I didn't even get into the psychedelics and all of this because that's its own presentation. But yes, I love to talk about psychedelics.
Will you still be there for the residency in July?
I have to see about that because I know I have a commitment in mid-July, but I think it's separate from it. I could in theory be there, but
we would like him to have some commitment at the very least.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure with adjunct status how that worked. So.
Yeah. All right. Everybody, y'all have a great night. Thank you so much for another wonderful town hall. I'm always so proud of our attendance rate. We have the highest in the whole university. So congratulations and good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Good evening.
Hi, Susie. Bye. Have a few people on. Hey, Drake, how are you?
Good. How are you? I just wanted to check in and say hello real quick. Good to
Hello.
see